Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. So I finished up the fender exit at the beginning, or for the intro montage, and you can see right down there, I have my O2 bung in place, complete with the little Tycon brace, so that way any force that's acting upon the O2 bung is acting upon a larger surface area, so I'm less likely to fracture the tube that way. And beyond that, I also I applied the surface finish that I wanted on the inside of the tube, courtesy of these ball Scotch-Brite deals that I got from Harbor Freight. So this one is 80 grit, I believe this one is 180, and this one is 400. So I went up sequentially through these, and then ended off with an actual cloth buffing wheel and some white rouge to give it a little bit better surface finish than what it had before. So you can still see where the mount is, semi-unfortunately, but it just is what it is, and it doesn't bother me all that much. So what we're going to work on today are the two new wastegate dump tubes. And I'll have to put the wheel back on this thing, probably should put the belly pan on as well. But we're going to craft the two new wastegate dump tubes for the race mode setup for this thing. So I don't think I'm going to mess around with trying to take them up through the fender with the exhaust. That's probably just asking for problems, as there is not a whole lot of space other than down in here, and that kind of needs to be left for the wheel as it turns through the throw of the steering. But like I showed at the beginning, we have this whole box of Tycon materials here, and I even have materials. You can see this one right here is a 4-inch Wiggins flange. So I'm also going to be building titanium intercooler tubes as I'm working on all this other titanium stuff. But to begin, we'll go ahead, knock out the wastegate dump tubes, then the exhaust side will be completed, and we can move on to the cold side from there. The Supra's first titanium atmospheric dump tube is all tacked together, all fabricated. So the way that I'm doing this is this tube will run underneath of this tube. That's because I think it will look cool. And this one will snake around, sit pretty much on top of this tube, following kind of that path right there. And then similar to my previous titanium atmospheric dump tubes, I'm going to end up making a gusset in between them just to tie everything together. And since there is a fair amount of length to these, that will make, rather than two dump tubes, essentially one big dump tube with two flanges and two outlets. And it will be less likely to rattle around and drum around and potentially fracture any of the welds. So now that this one's fabricated, I can focus my efforts on this guy right here and hopefully make pretty quick work out of it. So underneath of the car, we dump out right there, and don't mind the puddle of transmission fluid. The little electrical pass-through for the trans brake signal wire, or trans brake command wire, whatever you want to call it, is leaking, so I have to take it apart, fix that. But not a big deal. As you guys know, I'm pretty accustomed to pulling transmission pans at this point. But there is our dump tube, and the front wheel is maxed out in terms of the steering rack travel. So you can see we are more than good enough in terms of clearance to that tire. So I guess the only thing to do now is to get to building this second dump tube. And it looks like, based off of my 60-degree bend here, that a 45 will be the more adequate choice to make this second dump tube fit. So when I'm working with these titanium elbows, I kind of get to go back to my roots, which is what I'm doing right now. Since I don't have a great way to fasten these into my bandsaw, I end up cutting them with the angle grinder. And what I do is eyeball a cut line and then true the sides up on my belt sander. So when I first started building exhaust manifolds, I didn't have any fancy holding fixtures. I didn't have anything along those lines. So what I would do, I had, what would it have been, like 3 or 4 or so different bends that I was always working with. At a full 90, I would scribe a line down the center of the bend to make 2 45s. Or if I needed less or more than a 45, I would take from my 45-degree scribe line and put a second line on one of the halves, making either a 67.5 or a 22.5 degree bend. So that's the way that I did it for a long time before I actually got the elbow bandsaw cutting fixtures and things along those lines. But sometimes you need to go back to your roots. This is one of those times, and it feels good. Although this technique's a bit antiquated, it still feels good to go back to your roots from time to time and make sure that you still do know how to do some of these things. So I'll cut this elbow, end up with 2 45-degree bends, and hopefully that ends up being the bend that I need for the first bend, or the first bend after the initial 90 on that second dump tube. And if that is the case, then we'll just have to cut a section of straight, and then all will be well, and we can actually get to welding these things together. Both of the Supra's new titanium dump tubes are fabricated and ready to weld. So here's what we ended up with. So this one snakes underneath of this one and gives a pretty cool, wavy, what have you aesthetic to it, which I'm pretty keen on. And underneath here, let me crawl on the ground, but there's where they exit, and the bottoms are straight right now, although I will end up making a bit of a miter cut onto them just to, church the joint up a little bit. But from the bottom side, it's kind of what they look like. And like I said, I'm going to get a piece of sheet metal to make a gusset that goes in between them, and that will run up as far as I want it to on the straight section, or on the straight sections of each of them. And I'll probably end up making that, or those gusset panels, as long as I can, so that way everything is tied together as much as it can be. So I'm not going to weld these today. It's getting later and I need to get out of here, but at least everything is fabricated and everything is at the point and in the position where I can come in tomorrow, zap everything together, and then worry about the gusset panels at that point in time. It's a beautiful day to do some titanium welding, and I already have one of the dump tubes pulled off of the Supra and all prepped and ready to weld. So before I get started with that, there is one note that I wanted to make, and it's in regards to the fabrication process that I used in building these dump tubes. So you guys may have noticed that when I was tacking everything together, I had my back purge setup hooked up to the tubes, and for each individual joint, I actually back purged them. So that's something I've been doing for the past couple of years, and it's something that I highly advise that you guys implement into your fabrication process as well. So anytime you're working with a reactive metal, whether it be stainless, whether it be titanium, Inconel, anything that is going to try to pull contaminants in from the atmosphere, you really need an inert environment on the inside of the piece that you're welding as well as the outside. So the outside is taken care of by your torch. And you can see here I run an SPW number 16 gas lens, had really good luck with it. And that does a phenomenal job of keeping the outside of the workpiece shielded. However, that's only half of the equation, as there's still the inside of, in this example, a piece of tubing or a bracket or what have you. So you really need to shield both sides of it so that way you don't have any contamination, any oxidation on the inside of it. And as you are going through and doing your final welds, it will make your job much easier, not having to go over a little tack that has a bunch of nasty oxidation and all kinds of other crap on the inside. So if you have a shielded back purged tack, the puddle will flow very nicely and very predictably over top of it. However, the inverse to that is if you did not back purge the tack, the puddle will be going along nice and fine, and then you'll hit that spot, and the puddle has the propensity to become erratic, and you'll have a really nice weld and then a nasty swirled portion of it, and then when you can finally regain control of the puddle, then it will continue on as normal, but you'll have that nasty, unsightly looking portion to it, or you can at least. That could easily be avoided by purging as you're tacking. So it takes a little bit of extra effort, but really not that much extra time, provided that you have an easy to use purge setup like this. I have an SPW quick release purge line and then TIG Aesthetics purge plugs. So that makes things very easy, and some setups might not be as easy to use as this, but I highly advise taking the initiative, putting forth the effort, and just doing it, as it will make your life and your end product much easier and much better, respectively. Both of the Supra's new titanium wastegate dump tubes are welded up, and the only things left to do are to build the gusset panels and do the miter cuts on the bottom. So the materials for the gussets are currently on the way. They are not here right now, as I was not sure what the width of them needed to be. So I needed to build the dump tubes first prior to ordering materials for that. So that's the long way of saying we're not going to be doing that right now or potentially in this episode. But what we can work on is the new intercooler tubes. So I'm going to start with the cold side tube and then work my way over to the hot side tube. And the hot side tube, I'm pretty excited to be working with a titanium mandrel bend as opposed to a mandrel elbow. So this is just mill finish, so I will need to polish it, and I don't feel like doing that right now. So the cold side tube will be all mandrel elbows and polished titanium tubing. So I'll knock that one out first and then move on to the hot side tube later. So I have 3 of these 4-inch mandrel elbows, and then I have a 3/8 NPT bung for the IAT sensor. So with all of those components, and I have some extra 4-inch polished tube around here as well, that should make pretty quick and pretty easy work of this cold side tube. So I need to disconnect the 2 Wiggins connectors, disconnect the electrical connector for the IAT sensor, then I can pull that tube out and start crafting the new one. The Supra's new titanium cold side intercooler tube is all fabricated and ready to weld. So this thing went together very easily, and I was able to achieve better fitment and better clearance to this threaded portion of the dry sump tank mount and to the radiator. So the tube, and it's kind of difficult to see with the lighting here, but it sits kind of centered between everything here, and it also fits up better to the throttle body and the ferrule that is down on the intercooler. So this intercooler tube is all ready to weld, and once I have the bulk of it welded, then I can put it back in place, figure out the location of the IAT bung, get that put in, and at that point in time the cold side tube is done and I can move on to the hot side tube. The Supra now has a titanium cold side intercooler tube. So here's how it ended up, and I'm very happy with this. It fits much better than the aluminum tube and looks much cooler as well. So now that the cold side tube is squared away, it will be time to tackle the hot side tube. So this tube uses 2 short radius 90s and 1 long radius 90. And I ordered just the right amount of materials, so I have no room for error. I cannot screw this up. But we have the 2 short 90s right there. We have the long 90, and we have the 2 3-inch Wiggins flanges. So at this point, I can go ahead, pull the aluminum hot side tube, not cold side. We pull the aluminum hot side tube off and start replicating it in titanium. And just like that, the Supra has titanium intercooler tubes, titanium atmospheric wastegate dump tubes to complement the fender exit, and I couldn't be happier with this. So the car looks awesome, and although it isn't a massive change from then until now, it's something that I wanted to do, and it makes me happy to have these titanium tubes and to have knocked out another project that has been on the list. Although it was something that wasn't really necessary, and there are other projects that could have taken the place of these intercooler tubes. This one was for me. It made me happy, and I feel accomplished now. So I still need to make the gussets for the dump tubes, and actually the materials did arrive for that, but I just ran out of time, and that's something that we can knock out in the next episode. So I did not do anything on the Mark II, as I knew I was going to be cutting and creating a bunch of dust and abrasive debris with this project. So I wanted to get it knocked out first before I even thought about clear coating this thing, as it could have been a disaster if I did it in a different order of operations. But with all of that being said, another project done on this, or a couple of projects rather, and now I need to clean the shop up a bit, as I have a buddy of mine bringing his Supra in tomorrow, so I can do a little bit of welding and fabrication on it, and a little bit of maintenance for him. So before I drone on forever, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. So thank you guys, as always, for tuning in, for watching all of my harebrained ideas come to life, and providing a reason for me to keep doing this. So I'd still be building these parts otherwise, but the ability to share the things that I care about and things that I'm excited about with you guys is just awesome. And I appreciate you guys for being a wonderful viewing audience, for coming along for these past few years with all of these different projects and different iterations of different things. And I know that the progress that I make is a little bit slow going compared to a lot of people, but bear in mind I am just one person here, just tinkering around with some old Toyotas. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you guys very much for coming along on this journey with me, and I look forward to producing more content for you in the future. So with all that being said, and before I do drone on forever, that'll be the end of this one. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.